celebrating the power of possibility.
I'm Dwight Tarwater, and I believe anything is possible.
Welcome to Anything is Possible. I'm Halloran Hilton Hill, and these are great stories about great people whose lives prove that anything is possible. This is my friend, in full disclosure, my friend and brother, Dwight Tarwater. Thank you for being with us today.
It's a pleasure, Halloran. Thanks for having me.
You are, what's the correct terminology? Is it designate?
Justice designate is what people are referring to me as, which is certainly better than some things I've been called along the way.
You are up next to be a Supreme Court justice. Who would have thunk it?
Certainly not I. But my journey has been interesting and joyful. It's been marked by great triumphs and great defeats, and joy and pain. I never thought it would lead to the Supreme Court, but I'm so thankful, and I'm really looking forward to doing the work.
Let's go back to the beginning. Born and raised in Knoxville?
Knoxville, Tennessee, grew up right over there in West Hills, went to Bearden High School and the University of Tennessee and University of Tennessee Law School.
What was it like growing up in Knoxville? Tell me about your parents, your family.
My father was a World War II vet. He was, I guess Tom Brokaw called that the greatest generation. He worked very hard for everything that he had, but he grew up in this, on a kind of an old red dirt farm in southern Appalachia in South Knoxville. He went to the university, and then he was in the South Pacific during World War II. He worked as a salesman of various things from cars to advertising, and we lived a typical middle-class life in West Hills.
What about your mom?
My mom was also from Knoxville, and she had 4 brothers, and she liked order, which a lot of that generation did, and she was really good about instilling that quality in me. And I had one older sister, Carolyn. She's 8 years older.
So you go to the University of Tennessee and then the University of Tennessee Law School. Where did this interest in the law come from?
Well, Halloran, my mom told me that I was a good student, and I was a good student in high school. And she said, therefore, you should be a doctor. And so I went and I began my college career majoring in pre-med. And the best thing I can tell you about that is that organic chemistry made a lawyer out of me. So I switched over to political science. I was involved in a number of leadership activities at UT, and I thought I might eventually want a career in politics, but so I went to law school and graduated from law school in 1980 and went to work for a firm in Knoxville.
What was it like beginning your law career?
I worked with a great firm, a firm called Edgerton McAfee, and my classmate in law school was also hired at the same time as me. He's a guy named Herbert Slattery, who became the Attorney General, and prior to being Attorney General, he was counsel to the governor. So that was a relationship that goes way back, and we survived law school together, and we survived being first-year associates together.
So you get started in your law career, things start to take off. You get married, you have children?
Yeah. So I got married in 1978 to a gal whose name was Mary Flowers. She was from Dothan, Alabama.
I live there.
It's not too big a place. Her father was in politics. He was a state senator, and he was later Attorney General in Alabama. This was in the 60s, during the Civil Rights Movement, when times were tough. And so they lived in Montgomery for a while. And Mary had a brother named Richmond Flowers, who was a famous football player at the University of Tennessee, one of those VFLs, who also played there in the 60s. But Mary's father influenced me about morality and about right and wrong. He was on the correct side of the civil rights struggle and involved in numerous historic events in Alabama during the 60s, like Selma and the bus boycott, the Rosa Parks event, and his political career didn't turn out as well as it could have.
Because of the choices he made about whom to support during that time.
Exactly. He also chose to prosecute the Ku Klux Klan, and he chose to run for governor against the George Wallace machine. It was Lurleen, actually, that he ran against in 1968, maybe. And shortly after that, now this is a person who was on the correct side of the civil rights struggle, and they play hardball in Alabama in politics. It seems like hardball's coming back a bit, but he was ultimately indicted and went to prison, and that had a tremendous effect on Mary's life and her view of the virtue of public service. So she asked me very early on in our relationship, do you think you can just be a lawyer and be with me and we'll be okay? And that's what I chose to do.
Possibility powered by Pilot Flying J, Covenant Health, Home Federal, and the Knoxville News Sentinel.
So you're going along, you decide to just be a lawyer, honoring your wife's request, you know, you're going along, but then you hit major tragedy.
Yeah, that's true. And when it's hard when Christmas Eve is the worst day of your life, but that's the day Mary's heart stopped beating without much notice, without any notice, in fact. And my life changed in an instant. We were flying high then, Halloran, as you know, because you know my story. I found myself trying cases all over the country. I was national trial counsel for some of the biggest companies in the world. And of course, 2012 was a good year for us, except for that. That was the year Davis, my oldest son, won a gold medal. It was the year Catherine got engaged. My youngest son, Dwight, was hitting three-pointers and playing college basketball. And it was a huge pivot point in my life.
You got a gold medalist for a son, your other kids are doing well, you're flourishing in your career, you're married to the love of your life, and then Christmas Eve?
Christmas Eve, 5:58 a.m. I will never forget that. For many years, I would wake up and look at the clock, and it would be 5:58 a.m. But that's when I noticed that she was in fact dying, and she wasn't breathing, and the kids were home, which they never were back then with everything that they were doing in their lives. And Catherine and I tried to save her, but we couldn't. And she actually died on December 28th. They were able to get her heart started again in the ambulance, but it was not to be. Her heart had stopped for too long.
What did it do to you?
It was very difficult, and I never expected that my life would change in a moment. So I have never taken for granted a single breath that I've breathed, a single moment with those that I love. And I had to gather my kids around me and say, okay, this is what we're going to do now. And we're going to do this together. And I can tell you that at Christmas time, 2012, as C.S. Lewis would say, we were the four urchins huddled together for warmth.
So that's what it did to you. Because this show is about possibility, even in and through pain. What did it do to you? What did it do for you?
Well, Halloran, the best I can tell you on that is that all of us will face tragedy. And I've faced tragedy, and my tragedy is my tragedy, and my grief is my grief. But everyone has tragedy. There's tragedy in Nashville. There's tragedy in Memphis. There's tragedy in Louisville, Kentucky. There's tragedy in every single home of every Tennessean. And we are called to get through that. Even things that we'll never get over, we are called to get through. And that's what we knew we had to do. And took a long time.
You kind of push your way through that. Did you make any discoveries about God?
I felt like I hadn't really nowhere else to turn that would be meaningful. I must tell you that I used to bang on the door and ask why. What good could possibly come of this? Why did my kids lose their mom? Why did I lose my wife? Why did my mother-in-law lose her daughter after having lost another daughter? And for years, I asked why. And I finally, I was reading this book by C.S. Lewis called A Grief Observed, and I've probably read it a half a dozen times or more. But he makes this great statement in there where he says, sometimes when you think God has no answer, he actually has a very special type of no answer. And so I had nothing to do but trust. And it was hard. But he never left me. It was I who from time to time left him. But he never left me.
Did you get angry with God?
Oh, yeah.
Did you cuss him out?
Not quite that angry, man. I knew who I was talking to, but I'm sure he would have forgiven me like he's forgiven me for everything else that I've done.
What did your kids learn from that?
I know that my daughter Catherine, in particular, who has 3 little boys, her mother is an example for her in her life about her faith and her parenting. I know that for the boys, it was more about understanding what love means and what a mother's love is. And so I will tell you, Halloran, my kids are doing great. They're all doing what they want to do. They're doing well at it. I have 5 grandchildren. So the 4 urchins are now 12. And I have to tell you that the single biggest thing that helped me, the single biggest earthly thing that helped me, was the fact that my kids did okay. I really worried about it.
For anybody watching today, if you've lost someone you love, I guess you bear witness to the fact that there's life after, that some way, somehow, in the valley of the shadow of death, you can keep walking, you can keep going.
Well, yeah, and Halloran, it takes a while. It may take longer than, for me, it took much longer than I expected. But I am through that now. And the Supreme Court appointment was not something that I expected. It was something that has helped me in my whole journey. And I will tell you that I'm not going to meander around in the pit like I did. I'm looking to the horizon. I'm looking at a new career. I'm looking at new things, new relationships, new joy. And I know that's what Mary would have wanted for me anyway.
And you're ending up with a life in public service after all. You also went to work for Governor Haslam.
True.
Your life kind of moved in a different progression. What was that like?
Well, being Bill Haslam's general counsel is a lot like being the Maytag repairman. He is absolutely purely ethical. He is of the highest virtue.
He really is.
And so being his lawyer was pretty easy. Having to deal with a lot of things in the executive branch were much more difficult and complicated. But, he brought me to the dance. He plucked me out of my law firm at a time in my life when I needed a new gig. And it was interesting. I haven't told you this story about Mary, or haven't spoken about it, at least on the air, but about 3 months before she died, we were sitting on the porch having a glass of wine, and she said, "Hey, you know that promise that you made me back in 1978 that you wouldn't go into politics and you'd just be a lawyer?" She said, I was wrong to ask you that. I realized it could have changed history. You're not the man my father was. But I was just so wounded and hurt, and I didn't know. I just didn't know. And will you please forgive me? And I said, Mary, a 26-year-old, 25-year-old Dwight Tarwater in politics would have been a disaster. I said, I needed you to be my compass to lead me in the right direction. And then, interestingly enough, she said, well, I want you to know I release you from your pledge. I said, well, listen, I have no interest in a career in public service. And it was interesting. Then Christmas Eve came and went, and about a year later, Governor Haslam called and asked me to be his general counsel.
What have you learned about making things possible in your life? What are the rules of possibility?
Well, you got to try. You can't stop trying. Hard work helps a lot. living your life with honor helps put you in a spot to achieve things that others might not think possible. I've tried to do that. I suppose, like all of us, at times I've been less honorable than others, but I've tried to be a good example to my children. I've wanted them to be proud of me, and I've worked hard. Now, I will tell you, I didn't do this to become the next Supreme Court justice, but when Justice Lee announced her retirement, I thought to myself, you know, it's now or never. And I felt like that the process, which was very rigorous, would help me whether I got it or not. And, you know, I'm a little long in the tooth to be applying for this job. People told me I was too old and that I'd never been a judge. And, but I tried. Son of a gun, he picked me.
Gotta try.
Gotta try.
Dwight Tarwater, thank you for being on Anything Is Possible.
Thanks for having me, Howard.